Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through how to do a pedigree, and sometimes you'll actually get questions on a pedigree. So pedigree is often used to trace genetic defects, maybe trace a genetic defect through a family. However, it could be used to trace, it doesn't have to be a defect. It could be used to trace, some favorable characteristic through a family tree, or even just, a characteristic of interest, like blonde hair or red hair or something like that. So a pedigree is essentially, and allows us to trace some characteristic through a family tree. So, in a pedigree, males are represented by squares, and circles are females. Simple. Alright, affected individuals, those that have the disease or the characteristic we're interested in, are usually shaded in. So the normal or the unaffected people are just left blank, and the affected individuals, those squares and circles, are coloured in. Now when two individuals have a child, it's shown like this, a line connecting the two together, and then a line coming down to their child. So in this case, we've got a male and a female who have given birth to a male. Multiple children are just shown like this, the line at the bottom here. Alright, so this couple here have had one male and 3 females. So that's their offspring. And if they have kids, we just draw it like this, a line connecting them. So you can see this one of their girls has had a child, or had 2 children with this male here, a boy and a girl down the bottom here. So if we look at that, there are 3 generations. The top is the first generation, the next one here is generation 2, and the last one here, generation 3. So 3 generations in this family tree. Alright, so first thing you have to do when you're given a pedigree in a test or an exam, if they haven't told you already, is to figure out whether the affected individual, has a recessive condition or a dominant condition. So this person here, let's look at this girl here, this circle. Does she have a recessive condition or a dominant one? Well, the trick is to look at her parents. Is she different from both of her parents? Yes, she is different from both her parents. So how is it possible for 2 parents to have a child who is different? Well, what has to have happened, if I take my pen here, this parent must be a carrier. They must have a hidden recessive allele. And this parent here must also be a carrier. They must also have a hidden recessive allele. And this child here must be little a, little a. They must have 2 of these hidden recessive alleles, which actually then they're no longer hidden. They have the condition or the characteristic we're interested in. That's the only possible way a child can be different from both parents. Because, for instance, if we look at this child here, must have at least one big A. We don't know what the other one is, but they must have at least one big A that makes them unaffected or not have this characteristic. And if they have a big A, they must have got it from one of their parents. So at least one of their parents must be the same. So someone who has a dominant allele must have got it from one of their parents, and so one of their parents must also have the same phenotype, the same characteristic. So the only way for a child to have a different characteristic from both parents, is to have the parents must have those hidden recessive alleles, and the kid must be homozygous recessive. So in this situation, we can tell that being affected, the affected individuals must be recessive. So the condition must be recessive. So this boy down here, he also has a little a, and the parents must also be carriers, must have those hidden little a's. They can't be little a, because otherwise they would have the condition, but they must be carriers. They must have a hidden little a that they're passing on to their child here. So, essentially, the trick is, if you see kids pop up from unaffected parents, so affected kids pop up from unaffected parents, you know the condition must be recessive. Alright, let's go on to the other kind. Alright, so if we look at a family tree that has affected people in every generation, so it is more likely that the affected female in the second generation, so this one here, has passed on a dominant allele and inherited a dominant allele than it being recessive. The reason for that is it's actually fairly uncommon. If we go back to our recessive condition here, it's fairly uncommon that two parents both happen to have a hidden recessive allele for the same characteristic. So in this case, when you see the condition in every generation, it's most likely a dominant characteristic. So let's move on here. So essentially here, guys, if a disease or characteristic is dominant, it must be in every generation. So what's actually happening here is that this parent has at least one big A. Now I'll leave that one blank, we don't know. This person here has at least one big A, and this kid is inheriting that capital A, the dominant condition. And this one here is also inheriting the dominant. So what's happening here is these people have the condition because the big A is being passed down the generations. Alright, so it's much more likely that if a condition is dominant, you'll see it in every generation. So those are your clues. So let's just have a look at sort of another example, or I'll give you a few tips to actually answer these pedigrees. So tips: decide firstly whether it's dominant or recessive. Then write down what you know. So if, for instance, you decided it's a recessive condition, every affected person is little a, and everyone else is big A something. They've got at least one big A. Otherwise, they would be affected as well. Then you've got to try and fill in the gaps based on their parents and their kids. So let's do this. Let's go back to, firstly, why don't we do our recessive one here? So if I take my pen here, let's take the blue one. So we look at this and we see, oh, we've got kids who pop up from unaffected parents. So we know this must be recessive. So that's step one. We decide whether the condition is recessive or dominant. So this condition must be recessive. So that means the kids who have the condition must be little a, little a. Now secondly, still part of step two. So step two is writing down what we know. We know that people who have the condition must be little a, little a. We actually know that everyone else must be big A something. So I'm just going to write that in as a big A something. Just put a line there. So big A something. How do I know that all of these other people are big A something? Well, if they didn't have at least one big A, then they would also be affected. They'd have the condition. So they must have at least one dominant version of the allele, a big A in this case, to be unaffected. So step three, now I can go and try and fill in these gaps. So this child has inherited a little a from both of the parents. So the parents here must also have a little a here. Same down here, we can see this child must have inherited a little a from both of these parents. So they also must be carriers. They must have a little a, little a. Now the other ones, let's have a look. Can I figure this one out? Well, he's got a big A because he's normal. He's unaffected. But he could have got another big A from the other parent, or a little a. So we can't figure this one out. This one stays a mystery until this person maybe has kids of their own. Maybe then we can figure it out. Now this one here, same deal. We know he's got a big A from one parent, but the other parent could have still given him either a big A or a little a, so we can't figure this out. We just know that he's got at least one big A. And the same with this parent down here. This one too is also an unknown, a question mark, because we know he got a big A from one parent, but the recessive allele, he could have got a recessive or a dominant from the other parent. Both are still possible. So that's how you fill in a pedigree. Let's do another example. Let's do the example of the dominant one. So if I have a look at this pedigree here, the condition every affected person has an affected parent. It's in every generation. So that is a clue to me that it's probably a dominant condition. So I decide that this one is dominant. And actually, another big clue, or actually an even better clue, would be if an unaffected person popped up from two affected parents. That would confirm that the being normal is the recessive condition, but that's quite uncommon. So normally the clue that a condition is dominant is that it appears in every generation. So if a condition is dominant, that means we know all the people with the condition have at least one big A. So in this case, all of the affected people have at least one big A. And all of the unaffected individuals must be little a, because if the condition is dominant and if they had a big A, well, then they would have the condition, so we would colour them in. So all of the unaffected individuals here must be little a. Alright, so can we fill in a few gaps? Well, if we look here, alright, this parent here has had some children who inherited two little a's. They must have got one little a from this parent, but they must have been able to get at least one little a from the other parent too. So I know that this is a little a. Now can I work out this person here? In the last one we couldn't, but in this one, let's have a look. He gets at least one big A. We know that because he's got the condition. And the condition is dominant, so it's caused by having a big A. But the other letter, so he must have got the big A from this parent. That's the only one that's there. He must have got the little a from the other parent. This other parent only has little a's, so he must have inherited a little a from this parent. What about this one over here? Well, same story. Must have got the big A from this parent. The other parent only has little a's, so must have got a little a from that parent. And lastly, or the other way of looking at it, this person also had a child with two little a's. He must have passed on at least one little a to this child, and the other little a came from the other parent. So this last one down here, same situation as just before. One parent must have got the big A from this parent. The other parent only has little a's, so this must be a little a. So in this case, we can actually work out the genotype, what alleles every single person has. So again, last little bit, just to go through that one more time here, the tips for answering questions. Decide if the condition is dominant or recessive. Now read the question carefully. It might already tell you. That makes your life a lot easier. Number 2, write down what you already know about each person. If the condition is recessive, label everyone who's recessive little a, and everyone else big A something. If the condition is dominant, you do it the other way around. Everyone who's got the condition is big A something, and everyone else is little a. Alright, and then lastly, try and fill in these gaps. The ones that you labeled big A something, the ones that you know have at least one dominant allele, try and figure out what the other one is based on looking at either their parents or their children. Remembering, all you've got to do is remember that they must have got the big A from one parent, and whatever the other letter is must have come from the other parent. Or if you look at their kids again, one of the A's will have come from one parent, and the other one must have come from this parent. And sometimes you can use that to figure out what the other letter is. Sometimes both possibilities are still possible, and so you won't be able to figure out what it is, and you can just leave it blank or put a question mark there. Cool, I hope you found that helpful, and we'll leave it there.